many days into the conference to come and see something at this time. I'm quite impressed. So I always find bios a little bit kind of like uncomfortable to listen to, you know, when it's about you and you're kind of standing there. And it occurred to me only a couple of years ago, actually, that the point of them is to make an audience be convinced that you're worth listening to on a particular subject. And so I would actually argue that, like, listening to it just now, most of that bio is actually not relevant. I think what I want you to look at as a credibility check for me is that my pronouns are they, them. So that means that I'm, well, in my case, it means that I'm non-binary, I'm agender. And we're going to talk a little bit this morning about what that means in relation to a bunch of other stuff. But I think that's an important credential in terms of what we're talking about this morning. So, as you've already heard, ground rules. As you're probably aware, issues around transgender health in particular are quite a political hot topic, and unfortunately, and it's Pride Month, actually, in the UK. So that's awesome. But yeah, I'd like to make sure that we're all approaching this from the perspective of genuine curiosity and wanting to learn and grow and help people, basically. Like, if we want to help our patients, that's what brings most of us into clinical genetics settings, then these talks this morning are going to be a really important way to help you do that for your patients. So yeah, just to begin with. Yeah, so conflicts of interest don't have anything to disclose that's financial in nature. And I thought I'd stick the non-binary agender thingy up here because some of you might consider that a conflict. I don't. I consider that to be my positionality in relation to this topic. I'm also pan, so I'm in a same-sex relationship at the moment, and some of this is actually kind of relevant or tangentially relevant to some of the things that I'm going to be talking with you about this morning. Oh, hello, that's not what is that what I meant to do? Maybe that is what I meant to do. Is it? Yeah, okay. Okay, so I know it's early and I know that you're not really wanting to have to do anything other than listen, but I'm gonna beg you, could you please get your phones out? I would love it if you would participate in this poll with us. So there's 3 of them to begin with, and then we're gonna revisit the polls at the end, actually. So it's worth getting your phones out because there's more than just one of them. And so please know as well that this is all, of course, completely confidential, anonymous, nobody's going to know what you picked, but it's a really interesting way, I think, of reflecting on what we do and what we know. So yeah, so I'm going to give you a minute to scan that code, and then I'm going to press start voting in a second. Is anybody still struggling to get into the system? I can try and see. Okay, I'll give you another moment. Okay. It's very hard to see you. How about now? Are people in? Stick your hand up if you're still struggling to get in. Okay. Can I give you another couple of seconds? Because I hear the Wi-Fi's a bit dodgy in here sometimes. How about now? Okay, I'm sorry, my friend over there, we're going, okay? Hopefully you can get in by the second poll. Okay, so I'm going to press the lovely little button. Start voting. What do the squares and circles represent, people? Sex? Gender? Combo? Aren't they the same thing? Don't know. Okay. Sex. Awesome. All right. So I'm going to be a real annoying person right now. I'm not actually going to tell you what's right. You're going to figure it out during the course of my presentation this morning. So this is awesome. Thanks. That's great. So most people think it's sex. A couple of people think it's gender. A couple of people just unsure. Not, you know, all good. Excellent. So, well, if I can make this mouse work, that would be nice. There we go. All right. Here's your second poll. Ready? It should just pop up for you. If you already scanned the code on the last one, it should just pop up for you. So which of the following do we need to know about in clinical genetics to provide patient care? Sex? Gender? Both? Don't know. Go. Oh, or not go. There we go. both. Awesome. Yes. Okay, I said I wasn't going to tell you, but I love that answer. Thank you. Does anybody else, does that music make you anxious? It makes me a bit anxious. Anyway, so fantastic. Thank you. Most people think you need to know about both. 16% think just sex and 6% just gender. Awesome. So last poll for you before we get into the meat of what I've got to say. Okay? If you're drawing a pedigree, how do you choose what shape to use for your patient? Do you make an assumption based on their appearance, voice, or chart notes? Do you ask them? Do you use genetic data like karyotype? Or maybe this question doesn't apply to you, maybe you don't draw pedigrees, etc. So I'm going to press this start voting button. Amazing. Okay, cool. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so we've got 33% of people that say they ask their patients. Nice. 26% of you say that you make an assumption or that it's not applicable, and 16% using genetic data. Okay, cool. That's great. Thank you very much for humoring me, and I hope that was actually helpful in terms of reflecting on stuff, just to get us started. So what I thought I would do with you this morning is actually share with you my story of learning about sex and gender as both a researcher and as a human. So as you heard in the intro, and I know, like, if there's probably a lot of genetic counselors here, and if you're a genetic counselor, you probably know me as somebody who does psychiatric genetic stuff. So what on earth am I doing talking to you about sex and gender today? That's kind of a bit weird. I do think that's an entirely reasonable question. So, yeah, so basically I'm not here to be an example of like how to do things perfectly, quite the opposite. I'm going to share with you all my dirty laundry today about how I did not know what I was doing, how I actually did harm, and how I learned, okay? So, and I hope to share that with you as a way of validating some of you perhaps, and hopefully, you know, motivating some of you on a journey alongside me, essentially, to do better in this space. And this quote is like so Maya Angelou's like literally one of my heroes. So many amazing things that she has said. But in terms of like me sharing my dirty laundry with you this morning, this is how I think about things. And I would love for all of you to think about it in the same way. I don't want you to be sitting here this morning, if you learn new things about stuff, thinking, oh God, I've screwed that up. That means I'm terrible. No, it doesn't. Just like I'm going to share stuff with you that's bad, that doesn't mean I'm a bad person. It just means I didn't know any better. So do the best you can until you know better, and then when you do know better, do better, okay? So this is a paper that I published in 2008, apparently, but it's a project that I started designing in around 2004. Okay, this was actually the first ever study to look at the outcomes of psychiatric genetic counselling. It's not a very good study in a variety of different ways. It's really small. It was literally me providing genetic counselling for people and then going, how is that? So it's not, however, it was the first of its kind. And when I was designing this study, what I included in the demographics questions was this. It said, are you male or female? Please tick one box. And that was it. Hopefully you can spot some problems with that. And I think at the time I made the question like that because I realized that I didn't know what I was asking. I didn't really know whether I should say, what is your gender, what is your sex? And I didn't really know what male or female was that sex or gender? And so I kind of avoided the whole thing just by saying, are you male or female? Check one box, okay? So I think we do this a lot, right? So we tend to use, I think if we're honest with ourselves, in the language session yesterday, we talked about euphemisms a little bit, right? And so I think there's something awkward about saying the word sex. We think, oh, intercourse, and so we use the word gender because we think it's more polite. But actually the words mean different things, as we will see in a second. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that goes on. Anyway, so in the paper, this is a cut and paste from the actual results section. And there's a number of things, even there's few words that are just awful, but so I'm saying 12 patients were female, and that's what I reported because that's what I'd asked people about. But I don't actually know what that is. Like, am I talking about sex or gender? I don't know what people responded to, basically. The other thing I want to point out here is just the word Caucasian. So if that's something that you are still using, and I was until a few years ago, I didn't realize that this word came from a history of really quite appalling anti-black racism. And again, we use this euphemistically. We use it to mean white. So if you mean white, say white. Yeah, anyway. So this is where I started. Like, you know, I'm a scientist. I believe in rigor. I believe in data and specificity and all of that kind of thing. And yet here I was, not actually being sure what I was collecting about people and not being sure how to ask, but also not interrogating that in any meaningful way. So then in 2007, I was actually funded for a study by the Canadian federal funding agency thing for a big multi-year study that was looking at genetic and environmental contributions to postpartum depression in at-risk women. So it was women who had a history of psychiatric stuff. And yeah, anyway, big study got funded. And as a result of that getting funded, I was invited to serve on that very same federal funding agency review panel. And I was invited specifically to serve on their review committee for gender, sex, and health. So that was really my push to try and figure out what the hell all this stuff was about. Because, you know, I was like, okay, I'm going to be reviewing grants about this stuff, but I actually don't really know what I'm talking about. So here is what I learned. And yes, the title of this slide is just a little nod to any other Gen Xers in the room who were Salt and Pepper fans back in the day. What I learned was that sex is a term that relates to biology, physiology. And so we tend to think about sex as being male or female, binary, right? That they are opposites. No, it's not that way. There's a whole bunch of different ways that you can measure sex. You can use chromosomes. You can look at gonads, genitalia, hormones, and they may or may not align and give you the same data, or they might actually be in conflict with each other, as you all know if you've worked with people who are intersex, etc., or people who have androgen insensitivity syndrome and so on. I learned that gender is a term that relates to a social construct. So gender identity is this deep psychological sense of who you are, masculine, feminine, neither, both, some of one, some of the other. And gender expression may or may not align again with gender identity. And it's about things like pronouns, clothes, hair, how you present yourself, etc. So today, I've told you already that I'm agender, and yet I'm standing up here with a dress on, right? So this would be an indicator or a marker of femininity. My hair is cut by a barber. It's very short, indicator of masculinity. I'd like to be able to do more with my body to be more androgynous, but it has a particular shape and morphology that doesn't really allow me to do that very well. So there's just constraints here. So I'm sharing this personal stuff because I really want you to understand at a deeper level what it is that we're talking about here. Couple of other really important points. Sexuality is neither of these things. Sexuality is neither sex nor gender. Sexuality is who you're attracted to. Entirely other, okay? And really importantly, I want you to know that none of these parameters are binary. And various aspects of them may align in normative ways, but they may not. Right? So we tend to assume that sex and gender are going to align, right? That's when somebody's sex aligns with their gender aligns with their sex assigned at birth. That's what we call cis. Cis is not a slur, it's a descriptor, right? Trans is not a slur, it's a descriptor. And so, yeah, so those are the principles here. A couple of things I want to share with you before we get any deeper into things. So, because I struggled with this, so I just wondered if it was something that might be helpful for others as well. So man and woman are gender words, not sex words, okay? Male and female are sex words primarily, but they can also sometimes be used for gender, just to make things confusing for you, okay? But the way that I think about this is if you can use the word to describe a mouse, then it's a word that is about sex. If you cannot use the word to describe a mouse, it's a word that's about gender. Does that make sense? You wouldn't say a woman mouse, but you would say a female mouse. Yes? Yes, okay. I'm going to assume you're all alive and awake. Awesome. And then a couple of other things I just wanted to share, because I know that this is something that people can get confused about. Like, you end up doing mental gymnastics. When somebody says something like trans man, you're like, oh God, what does that mean? Does that mean that what sex was assigned at birth, and how do they identify, and that sort of thing? So the really easy way to think about this is the words are trans man. That means the person is a man who was assigned female sex at birth. On the other hand, a trans woman is a woman. The person is a woman who is trans, i.e. was assigned male sex at birth, okay? So hopefully that helps. And then the other thing I wanted to do before we go any further is literally just deconstruct this, letter salad, this acronym, and just highlight for you what the different components of it actually refer to. Because on the last slide, I was talking about sex, gender, sexuality, and about how those things are all different and how they may or may not align with each other, etc. So let's break it down, okay? So LGBTQIA2S+, right? So lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer or questioning, intersex, asexual, 2S means two-spirit, plus. Okay, that's including other people who don't align with any of those labels. So LGB and A all refer to sexuality, okay? T and 2S both refer to gender. And just as a note, this 2S, the two-spirit thing, you don't get to use that unless you're a member of an indigenous group, so where it's a traditional, well-understood gender identity. And I think Kim's going to talk a little bit more about the history of colonialism and as it relates to gender and so on. Q, queer or questioning, that relates to sexuality and or gender. I, intersex, relates to sex. So it's actually not that surprising that people kind of get a bit confused and overwhelmed, because there's a whole bunch of different constructs that are represented within that single acronym, right? So it's a bit of a mess, but yeah. Anyway, so that was an aside. That's the stuff I learned, right, around 2008-ish. So what that made me do was start questioning, well then, okay, I'm a genetic counselor, pedigrees matter to me, so what is it that I'm drawing? If I'm drawing a square or a circle, is it sex or is it gender? Okay, and this was the first question that I asked you all this morning. And lots of you said sex, right? So what I did when I started asking this question was to go back to the guidance that was produced. So this is the official documentation of the National Society of Genetic Counselors, published in 2008. And it describes, so the QR code will take you directly to the paper if you want to have a look at it. And so it's talking about what the squares and circles are. And there's a whole bunch of stuff to unpack in this little block of text that I've got here. And hopefully, given what I've just shared with you about what the definitions are, if you look at this, you can start to see some of the problems with it. There's a lot of conflation of sex and gender in these few words. And I'm not pointing this out to diss the authors, I'm not. It's just that it demonstrates a point in time, and it demonstrates where we're at in learning processes, right? But what I want to bring your attention to is the little bit that's underlined there in orange that matches the wall. It's beautiful. Is that the symbols are supposed to be representing phenotypic gender, and I'm going to use air quotes very liberally here, because what on earth does that mean? What does that mean? And I realized as I was reading it, I didn't actually know. I had no idea. So this started off like a thought process for me, and it was just something that percolated away in the back of my mind for a while, and it kind of bothered me because, again, I'm a scientist, and I want to be specific, and I want to be explicit, and I want to know what I'm doing, and I want to measure it the right way, and that sort of thing. So this was just something that kind of, bothered me gently, I'm going to say. So around 2017, I met this awesome person. This is Heather Barnes. She was one of my students at the University of British Columbia in the genetic counselling program. And she was really interested in trans and non-binary views on things. And so together, we ended up designing a study which actually ended up inviting members of this group to come and speak with us about how they would want to be represented on pedigrees. Like, if we're not sure what squares and circles and so on represent, if it's sex or gender, what do people who are trans and non-binary think? Like, if we provide them with some information about how we draw pedigrees and so on, what do they think about how they would want to be represented? And we got some very, very clear data. And actually, this was replicated in a bunch of quantitative studies as well. what we found was that people wanted the symbols, the squares and circles and so on, to represent gender, not sex, okay? And they understood that sex was really important to capture too, so they wanted that denoted like with these letters, AFAB, AMAB, all right? Assigned female at birth, assigned male at birth, okay? So a square represents a man, boy, a circle represents a woman, girl, and a diamond represents somebody who's non-binary, okay? So that was their very strong guidance, and again, the QR code will take you to that. So one of the really interesting things is that this was a qualitative study, and in qualitative studies, it's really important that you define your positionality for the readers of your paper, okay? And because we don't even pretend in qualitative research that what we're trying to do is objective. It isn't. As a qualitative researcher, you're subjectively involved in the interpretation of the data. So as such, it's important for readers to know like who you are. What is your lens that you're bringing to the interpretation of the data that you've collected? And so we needed to say something about who we were in relation to the data that we were collecting. And so my co-authors, Heather Barnes and Emily Morris, were like, well, we can write that we're all, you know, this was written by 3 cis white women. I was like, I don't really, but that was all I could say. And then, you know, I said, I don't actually feel that's quite right. I'm not entirely sure. And then Emily said, well, at least we can all say that we've not had gender dysphoria, right? And I was like, no, not really. So basically the best that I could come up with in the end that was authentic and true was to say the authors are all white genetic counselors who were assigned female sex at birth and express a gender that aligns with their birth sex. Okay, so that was the best that I could come up with at the time. So basically this is a moment in time of me going through a process of questioning who I was in relation to this. So I actually only figured out that I was agender in 2021, okay, at the age of 45. And that's somewhat shameful and embarrassing to me. It's not something that suddenly happened to me when I was 45. I have always been agender. I just didn't have words to describe it. I didn't have words to articulate who I was. And I thought, you don't know what anybody else's internal experience is like, so I just assumed that everybody else's was like mine. And I just thought I was crapper at, oh, sorry, probably shouldn't swear. I just thought I wasn't as good as everybody else as conforming with the expectations, you know what I mean? So yeah, so this is an important part of my journey as a human as well as a researcher. So Heather's beautiful paper ended up informing a revision of the pedigree nomenclature guidelines. And again, this QR code will take you to the most updated version of those guidelines, which actually came out in September last year. And what I've done is cut and pasted the most critical part of that paper into this slide. So as you can see, so gender is represented, so basically it's the rows, right? And sex is represented in the columns. So as we've discussed, right, what people wanted was for squares and circles and diamonds to represent gender. So what we're doing is in the top row, that's for people whose gender is man, boy. Middle row, woman, girl. Bottom is non-binary. So if I look at my own stuff, I am non-binary, so I'm in that bottom row. But my sex assigned at birth is female. So I'm that middle one there, bottom row, that says AFAB. Okay? So you can find yourself in that if you want to. Yeah, what else did I want? Oh yeah, that was what I wanted to say. The other cool thing that we did with this paper was actually sort of disrupt the cis heteronormativity that we'd always engaged in terms of the example pedigrees in the paper. So what we always would have before was like, you know, squares on the left, circles on the right, and it was always heteronormative couples. And now there's a whole bunch of beautiful, you know, like same-sex couples in there. It's lovely. So anyway, do read the paper. I am quite proud of it. Just a quick note for researchers in the room who may be interested in, okay, so if you don't just write in your demographics survey, are you male or female, check 1, what do you do? Okay, here's some examples. So, you know, so it's really important, I think, if you're doing research to think about what it is that you actually need to know. Is it sex that you need to know about for your study question, or is it gender, or is it both? okay? Not the same thing as we've discussed. And if you need to know if somebody is trans, you can literally just say, are you trans? Yes, no, don't want to say, okay? That's not offensive, you can do that. And Kim and I were talking yesterday about how we both feel that it is actually really, in most studies, especially if it's about health outcomes in any way, it is really important to know about gender. Because in the same way that racism, for example, affects health outcomes, so problems that people have in terms of gender in the healthcare system also affect health outcomes. So if you're looking at those kinds of things, then I would argue that gender is often going to be really important, but yeah, really think deeply about what it is you want to collect. Okay, so what do we need to know about to provide good patient care? Most of you at the beginning said you need to know about both. Yay, you're right. So, but let's talk about that a little bit more deeply. Obviously, we need to know about sex. We're in genetics. What you're looking at here is a pedigree from Heather Barnes' paper. And in this situation, this is a pedigree that was constructed under guidance from that 2008 pedigree nomenclature paper. So, i.e., it was all about phenotypic gender, whatever that is, okay? So in this situation, we've got an X-linked condition, and John, there on the bottom left, does not mention that his sister Rebecca is trans. So she's represented as a circle, which is awesome, as she should be. But it doesn't say anything about AMAB or AFAB next to her. So when it comes up, so John was provided with recommendations about screening and testing that focused on John and his brother Robert, but it didn't apply to his sister Rebecca. He was counselled that his sisters are at risk to be carriers, and carriers are typically unaffected. But actually for Rebecca, it might be a bit different. So this is a problem. This is why we need to know about sex in genetic counselling. But we also need to know about gender. So misgendering, using the wrong pronouns or a name that does not align with somebody's gender identity, can lead to things like increased levels of depression, reduced self-esteem, stigma, and so on. And when you experience this in a healthcare setting, it can lead to feelings of unsafety, which can result in decreased access to healthcare services. So another bit of too much information for you all. I have not been for a PAP in years. I have not yet had a mammogram. Reasons being, I have issues about the way that my body gets treated in healthcare settings, okay? So I'm living example of the ways in which gendered experiences and the ways in which we make assumptions about patients actually impacts our ability or our desire to access healthcare stuff. So we do need to know about both. So yay everybody that said sex and gender. Good job you. Okay, so given that, how do we ask about these things, and how do I manage this in my practice? So please, I'm only going to pick on a couple of these. Please don't say transgendered. No, it's just transgender. Okay, it's not preferred pronouns. They're just my pronouns. They're not preferred. They're just my pronouns. Okay, and then the last one I want to pick on is that row at the bottom. I know that we often use Ms., Mr., etc. as an honorific to try and be respectful, but if the one that you pick does not align with somebody, it's not great. So recent example for me, I checked into the hotel that I was staying at in Manchester, and I'd done the pre-check-in stuff that was like, what's your honorific? And apparently they need one for you to move on through the registration thing. So I checked doctor, because I am in fact a doctor. And I saw it on the little printout that the person gave me when I checked in, but she said to me, "Hi, Ms. Austin." And it's like, so yeah, so these things, I know it's intended in a good way, but we have to be really careful about what we're doing. Okay. So pronouns, let's talk about that, because that gets really political. Pronouns are literally just a set of words that we use to identify ourselves and others when we're not using a name. So I, you, he, she, we, those are all pronouns. So when people say, I don't do pronouns, like, yes, you do. You can't make a sentence without using pronouns. What we get annoyed or, upset about is the ones that we use to refer to other people in the third person, right? So he, she, they, them, etc. So pronouns are not gender identity, necessarily, okay? So it's a good indicator, perhaps sometimes they align, but don't assume that they're one and the same thing. So what you can do here, if you want to be an ally, is to introduce yourself and share your pronouns. I'm going to give you an example of how we can do that in a sec. Don't assume someone's gender or pronouns based on how they present, okay? Don't push if you don't get a clear answer. It can be really personal and it's not always safe. I don't know if you know about what's happening in the US at the moment, for example, in Florida with bathroom bans, etc., but it's very genuinely not safe. So don't push if you don't get. If you make a mistake, apologize and correct yourself. Don't make excuses. I'm sorry, move on. Make sure you do better in the future. And if you start saying, oh, I'm so sorry, I really didn't mean to, you're centering yourself. You're making the person that you've just misgendered take care of you. And, you know, another experience I had yesterday, in fact, was saying, you know, I bent over to somebody who was misgendering me and they didn't know. And I said, you know, just to let you know, I'm using they, them now. And they just said to me, I'm not very good at that. End of sentence. Like, that's also not really okay. Like, you know, if you care about the person, like, I'm sorry, I'll try to do better, you know? Like, none of us are perfect. We're going to mess up. We're going to make mistakes. That's fine. But it's how we deal with our mistakes that matters. All right. So oh, God, what do I do here? There we go. So how do you ask about pronouns? This is an example. This is not the be-all, end-all. I'm not holding up this is the perfect example, but here we go.
Hello, good morning. It's really nice to meet you, Andrea.
Hello, good morning.
Hi, my name is Janine Austin, and I use they, them pronouns. Which ones do you use?
She, her.
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, lovely to meet you. So I'm a genetic counsellor, as you know, and I thought that maybe a good place for us to start talking today would just be about what brought you to see me today. Like, why are we having this appointment today?
Cool. So not exactly a big deal. It's one of these things that we cook up in our heads to be like terrifying. But, you know, if you're a genetic counsellor, you routinely ask people, your parents related to each other by blood, right? That kind of thing. So is it more difficult than that? I'm going to argue no.
Hello, good morning. It's really nice to meet you.
No, that's not what I'm doing here. Sorry, hang on one sec. No, I can't make it move on. There we go. So, how do you explain gender symbols on a pedigree?
Okay, so if it's all right with you, I'm going to start drawing out your family history. And I'll talk you through it as I'm doing it, and I'll show you when I'm done, okay? Mm-hmm. So, in genetics, we draw women as circles and men as squares. And so you've told me that your pronouns are she, her, so I'm going to draw you as a circle in the middle of my page to represent you as a woman.
So you'll notice that I didn't ask her if her gender identity, like, related to her pronouns, but did you notice my inflection was going up at the end? It was a question. There was a question embedded in the statement, essentially. So it was giving her an opportunity to say, actually, I would rather be represented as blah, blah. She didn't. Okay, so if you don't want to make a big deal out of it, there's very easy ways to sort of move forward with this stuff. Oh, God. Sorry, people. That's not it. Sorry, I'm struggling with this. No, why am I going backwards? Let's do this. There we go.
So if it's all right with you, I'm going to start.
Okay, and then this is about discussing why it's important to know about both sex and gender.
Okay, and just to mention as well, so as I said, I'm representing in this pedigree women as circles, and girls, I should say, as well. Your sister Sarah has a circle, and men, boys as squares. But it's also really important to me, in genetics, it's important to know what somebody's sex is as well. So if there's anybody in the family as we're talking together that has a sex assigned at birth that's different than their current gender identity, it'd be really important if you could let me know about that. So just to check, there's nobody so far, right?
No, yeah,
okay.
I don't think that there will be any in my family.
Okay, so everybody in your family is cis, same gender as sex. Perfect. Okay.
Good, just some examples to share with you. See if I can advance here. No. Okay. So basically, gender inclusivity is really important to every aspect of a session. So things to an appointment. So what does your clinic website look like? Do you have anything in there about, like, gendered language in the clinic's name? Do you have any anti-discrimination statements? How do staff welcome patients? Do they say, hey, Ms., hello, Ms., hello, Mr.? And do they welcome people without assuming gender or heterosexuality? Where's your husband? Is your husband here with you, etc.? Are there any visible signs of allyship? Is there an all-gender bathroom? I love all-gender bathrooms. It makes me always feel like there's a special bathroom just for me. It's awesome. Are your intake forms gender inclusive? Do they ask about pronouns and gender identity? Do you introduce yourself with your pronouns? I just want to share that this slide is from Hannah Lauren. It's edited from her, but she's also awesome at talking about this topic. So you should all know who she is. Okay, so, and when you're talking with people about body parts, use their language. So, for example, trans men will often talk about chest feeding, not breastfeeding, okay? So that's really the key point here, you know, explaining why sensitive questions are relevant and that sort of thing, normalizing patients' experiences. And I'm just going to finish quickly before we do the polls again in talking about, like, I know that some of you in the room are worried about this. You know, if I ask everybody about their pronouns, aren't I going to piss some people off? Yeah, you might. But I really want you to think about who it is that you might be upsetting and whose needs it is that usually get centered in society, not just in genetic settings. And what price is paid by those who tend to be marginalized at the expense of majority comfort? And again, as I mentioned, we do tend to ask people really awkward questions about were your parents related to each other by blood, etc. And we manage that somehow, so why is this different, okay? Awesome, so I'm gonna leave it there, but we're gonna do those lovely polls again, so get your phones out, please. Phones out, phones out. Okay, so in a pedigree, what do the squares and circles represent? Sex, gender, some kind of combo, don't know. Go. Okay, we've got a good shift towards gender. That's nice, good job, people. People that said sex, I don't know whose talk you were listening to. Maybe we should try it again on the recording. Yeah, no, that's awesome. Thank you, people. Okay, so this is the next one. Which of the following do we need to know about? You all did great on this in the first round, so let's see what we're doing this time. Stars all around, love it, cool. Final poll for you. Okay, so when you're drawing a pedigree, I know that you haven't had a chance to do a pedigree in the last 20 minutes, but like, if you were gonna do one now, what would you do? So great, thank you. That's delightful. That's made my day. Okay, so summary just before I hand you over to Kim. Sex and gender, not the same thing, right? They both matter in clinical genetic settings. Pedigree symbols represent gender, not sex. And sex can be annotated alongside. Asking about pronouns doesn't have to be a big deal. A small thing can make a huge difference for people who are otherwise marginalized. So thank you so much for listening and for participating with the polls. Really appreciate it. Okay. And I think maybe if anybody has, like I don't want to be discussion questions because Kim and I are going to take discussion stuff at the end, but if there's any like content clarifying questions, I'd be happy to take them right now. Yeah, go for it. Yeah, yeah.
It's a particular one, it might be a bit of a discussion-y one, but it's particularly about the pedigree symbols.
Yeah.
So I'm Beth Code, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm a genetic counsellor from St George's in London. And it's about the diamond symbol in particular, and I think it might be something that's a bit of a difference in terms of location. Like in the language section yesterday, we talked about how person-centred and identity-centred vary a bit from the US to the UK. We recently held a consensus meeting supported by the UK Cancer Genetics Group here with kind of trans cancer genetic service users, with trans sort of advocates and patient groups. and also the kind of genetics community as well. And there was discomfort in using the diamond symbol because it already had a use and was being used when gender was not specified, or possibly here we use it quite a lot when gender's not known. And as a result, some of our sort of stakeholders fed back that they felt that that was a little bit invalidating because it was saying, no, I do know what my gender is. And I do.
Totally.
So just wanted to know about the thoughts behind that symbol.
Yeah, absolutely. So we went through a lot of different possibilities, like a symbol that was half a square and half a circle, etc., a star, all sorts of different things. So yes, I totally hear you, but what we're trying to do is move away from that old guidance. The old guidance was horrible. It was horrible. You use a diamond when it's not clinically relevant or when it doesn't matter. Do you know what I mean? But what we're doing is binning that whole thing entirely. And so those assumptions about what it has meant in the past, we also talked about, we had to think about things that were pragmatic as well, like, can you actually draw the shape in a pedigree in a way that's recognizable? So we talked about things like triangles. We already use triangles for another purpose in pedigrees. So what about having the triangle upside down? That has horrific connotations from history that, like, Nazi Germany and so on, that we really don't want to use. So yeah, ultimately what came out from our people and from other studies since is that if we make sure that we're very explicit in moving away from what the history and genetics of that, when it doesn't matter. People love the idea of it being a diamond. It's like, I am a bit of a diamond, aren't I? So it's practical, it's easy to draw, it's already there in the symbol, like menus on, Epic or whatever. And if we're very consciously purposeful about saying it does not mean it doesn't matter anymore. What it means now is it means non-binary, right? Then it feels great to people, was what we found, yeah. But thank you very much for that. It was a beautiful question.
No, thanks, that's very helpful. And we had the exact same thing, is that we couldn't decide on another one.
So
our consensus was more work. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
I think we're going to stop with questions now, and we've got a couple really good ones coming in online that we're going to hold for later. So I'll